Kunal was a humble and hard-working young man from Ibadan, the kind of man who believed that dreams were built one small step at a time. Every morning he rode his old delivery bike through traffic, carrying packages for other people's companies while secretly dreaming of owning his own logistics business one day. He wasn't lazy, he just hadn't found his big break yet. His wife, Chioma, was beautiful and confident, the kind of woman who loved fancy things and loud admiration. But lately, she had grown restless. She looked around their small apartment and sighed loudly, complaining that their life was too small for her dreams. She wanted vacations, designer bags, and attention, things Kunal couldn't yet afford. Whenever Kunal talked about his dream of starting Swift Haul, a delivery company of his own, Chioma would laugh, calling it impossible. "You? A CEO? You can't even afford a new bike," she would say, rolling her eyes. Kunal tried to explain that big dreams take time, that one day their story would change. But Chioma didn't want patience. She wanted results. She compared him to her friends' husbands, men who drove luxury cars and posted pictures from Dubai, and each comparison cut him deeply. Kunal still loved her. He cooked with her, shared stories, and tried to keep her smiling, but nothing seemed enough. Every night, when he came home tired from deliveries, Chioma's mood turned colder. Her complaints grew louder, and her respect faded a little more each day. He often sat in silence, staring at his rough hands and wondering if his love wasn't strong enough to keep her happy. Still, deep inside, he refused to stop dreaming. He believed in the power of small beginnings, in quiet hustle, and in faith that someday things would change. But as Chioma grew more distant, Kunal began to sense a storm coming. A storm that would soon test not just his love, but his strength, patience, and purpose. In his heart, he prayed that when success finally found him, she would still be there to see it. He didn't know then that prayer would never be answered. Chioma's words had become sharper than knives. Every evening when Kunal returned home, tired and sweaty from deliveries, she found something new to complain about. "Look at you," she would sneer. "A man who can't even afford a new car wants to be a CEO?" Her voice carried so loud that even the neighbors could hear. Kunal would lower his eyes, trying to avoid an argument, but her tone only grew stronger. Whenever they visited her friends, Chioma would make subtle jabs that cut deep, saying things like, "Some men are born to succeed, and some are just comfortable being ordinary." Her friends laughed, unaware of how much those words wounded him. Kunal tried to stay calm. He reminded her gently that success doesn't happen overnight, that he was working hard for their future. But Chioma wasn't listening anymore. She had already compared him to every wealthy man she knew. "Bayo just bought his wife a car," she'd say. "Kimmy's husband took her to Dubai. What about us, Kunal? You can't even take me to Lagos Island for a weekend." Her words carried bitterness, not love. One night, when he was counting his small savings and planning how to expand his work, Chioma scoffed. "You think your little delivery job will make you rich? Wake up, Kunal. Without me, you'll never be successful." The sentence hit him like a heavy stone. He didn't respond, but something inside him broke quietly. He smiled weakly and said, "Maybe one day you'll see." She laughed coldly and walked away, leaving him alone with his thoughts. That night, Kunal couldn't sleep. Her voice kept replaying in his mind, "You'll never be successful without me." Those words burned like fire in his chest. He stared at the ceiling, torn between proving her wrong and giving up completely. But deep down something shifted. The humiliation, the pain, the constant criticism, all of it began turning into quiet determination. He didn't say it out loud, but in his heart, he made a silent promise. One day, the same woman who mocked him would see his name everywhere. That night, the house felt heavier than usual. Kunal came home late, his shirt soaked with sweat after a long day of deliveries. He quietly placed his bag down, hoping Chioma would already be asleep, but she was waiting. Her arms were crossed, eyes burning with anger. "So this is your life now," she snapped, "running around the city like a messenger boy while other men build companies?" Kunal tried to explain that he was working on something bigger, that every delivery was a step toward his dream. But she didn't want to hear it. "Dreams," she scoffed. "You're a failure with big dreams and an empty pocket. Wake up, Kunal." He stood there, speechless, his throat tight. He had endured months of her insults, her comparisons, her cold looks. He loved her, but every word from her mouth now felt like poison. She kept shouting, pacing the room, throwing blame at everything he wasn't. You can't even provide the life I deserve, she said. You keep talking about the future, but what about now? Something inside Kunnel snapped. His silence broke. Chioma, he said quietly. Maybe you'll be happier without me. The words surprised even him. For a moment, the room went still. Chioma stared at him, stunned, then burst into laughter. A bitter, cruel laugh. Finally, some sense, she said, grabbing her phone. Within an hour, she packed her things, sweeping through the house like a storm, taking most of what they owned. The TV, the kitchenware, even his favorite chair. Kunnel stood there, watching the woman he once called his partner turn her back without a single look of regret. As she reached the door, she turned and gave one last blow. Let's see how far you go without me, she said, her voice dripping with pride. Then she slammed the door and walked away. The silence that followed was deafening. Kunnel sank onto the floor, surrounded by emptiness. Both in the room and in his heart. His hands trembled, his mind raced, but one thought kept echoing louder than all the pain. This is the moment everything changes. He didn't know how yet, but her goodbye had just lit the fire that would rebuild his life. After Chioma left, the house felt like a graveyard. The laughter, the warmth, even the little arguments, all gone. Kunnel would come home from work, sit on the bare floor, and stare at the empty walls where her pictures used to hang. Some nights he cried quietly, wondering how love could turn into shame so fast. His friends noticed the change in him. They told him to forget her, to move on, but they didn't understand how deep the wound ran. He had not only lost his wife, he had lost his confidence. For days he walked around in silence, delivering parcels while fighting the ache inside. But pain has a strange power. One evening, while sitting alone, Kunnel picked up a notebook and wrote 3 words. Swift Hall, Nigeria, my dream. Something inside him sparked again. He remembered every insult, every time Chioma said he'd never make it, and instead of breaking him, those words began to drive him. He decided to turn the pain into power. He started small, working late nights to study business on his phone. He watched free tutorials, read about delivery operations, and learned how to handle clients. During the day, he took small contracts, delivering goods between Ibadan and Lagos, and saved every naira he could. Sometimes he skipped meals to keep fuel in his borrowed bike. The work was hard, the hours endless, but for the first time, Kunnel felt alive. He was no longer doing this to prove something to Chioma. He was doing it for himself. As weeks turned into months, small miracles began to happen. Customers trusted him for his honesty and consistency. He started getting more calls, more referrals, more belief. His notebook became his roadmap, filled with plans and dreams that once felt impossible. Every ride through the dusty streets of Ibadan was now a symbol of resilience. At night, when exhaustion tried to drown him, Kunnel whispered to himself, "One day, this will all make sense." He didn't have money, he didn't have support, but he had fire. And that fire was finally stronger than his pain. From that borrowed bike, a dream was quietly being born. After endless months of sleepless nights and long rides under the hot sun, Kunnel finally got a call that would change everything. A local food company needed someone reliable to handle their daily deliveries, and one of his small clients had recommended him. He could barely believe it. This was the kind of break he had been praying for. The contract wasn't huge, but it was steady work, something he could build on. The next morning, Kunnel showed up at the company before sunrise, his borrowed bike polished, his uniform clean, his heart racing. He promised himself that no delivery would ever be late, no package mishandled, and no client left unsatisfied. Days turned into weeks, and Kunnel gave everything he had to the job. He worked through rain, traffic, and exhaustion, always smiling and respectful. When the company's manager noticed his consistency, he told others in the industry about him. "There's this young man who delivers like clockwork," he said. Soon calls started coming in from new clients, restaurants, supermarkets, and small stores needing deliveries. Kunnel's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. As business grew, he saved every profit he could. Instead of spending it, he reinvested it. Within months, he was able to buy his first used van. That day, he stood beside it, running his hand over the metal, whispering a quiet thank you. What started with one bike had now become a company. Swift Hall, Nigeria was slowly becoming real. Kunnel hired 2 young men from his neighborhood to help him. He trained them to work with the same honesty and dedication he was known for. Soon, customers began recognizing the Swifthall logo and trusting their services completely. The little business that everyone once ignored started getting attention. With every successful delivery, Connell's confidence grew stronger. He was no longer the man people pitied or mocked. He was a leader building something meaningful. His face carried peace now, not pain. Every time he saw one of his vans on the road, he felt a rush of pride. What Chioma once called a foolish dream had started to take shape, and for the first time Connell realized he was becoming exactly who he always knew he could be. Connell's life had slowly started to change in ways he never imagined. The same man who once struggled to pay rent was now walking into an office with a nameplate that read Swifthall Nigeria Limited. Registering his business officially felt like claiming his destiny. He remembered every long night, every harsh word, every tear, and now, he was finally seeing the reward. With growing clients and more contracts coming in, Connell hired a few more staff members. He trained them himself, teaching them that honesty and consistency were more valuable than shortcuts. In no time, people around the community began to notice his integrity. If a delivery was done right, people said, "It must be Swifthall." He became a quiet inspiration. Market women smiled when they saw his branded vans, and young boys often waved at him in admiration. But Connell remained humble, still dressing simply, still treating everyone with respect. One day, a producer from a local radio station called him. They wanted to interview him on a show called From Nothing to Something, a segment that celebrated hardworking Nigerians who built success from the ground up. Connell hesitated at first. He wasn't used to attention, but eventually agreed. The day of the interview, he sat in the studio, his hands slightly shaking, but his voice calm. He spoke honestly about his struggles, about how pain became his teacher, and how every failure pushed him closer to growth. "It wasn't easy," he said, smiling softly, "but I learned that faith, not fear, is what builds dreams." The host was moved, and so were listeners across the city. That same evening, Chioma's friend was scrolling through her phone when she heard Connell's voice on the radio. She quickly recorded it and sent it to Chioma with a message. "Isn't this your ex-husband?" When Chioma opened the clip, her hands trembled. Seeing Connell's calm, confident smile, and hearing him talk about success hit her harder than she expected. She replayed the video several times in silence. The man she once called a failure was now speaking like a man who had found himself. And for the first time, Chioma realized she had underestimated the very person she once mocked. Connell's hard work was finally paying off in ways he had only dreamed of. Swifthall Nigeria, which had started with a single borrowed bike, now had a fleet of vans and staff bustling across the city. Word of his reliability and honesty spread quickly, and soon he was expanding into 3 major Nigerian cities: Lagos, Abuja, and Port Harcourt. Each new office brought more challenges, but Connell faced them head-on, confident in the system he had built and the team he had trained. He was no longer just a delivery man. He was a businessman commanding respect and attention. The turning point came when a major e-commerce brand reached out for a partnership. They were impressed with Connell's consistency, his growing network, and the reputation Swifthall had earned. Signing that deal felt surreal, a moment he had pictured countless nights while struggling to save a few naira. From that day, Swifthall became a household name among businesses and online shoppers. Connell's company handled thousands of deliveries a week, and his small startup was suddenly in the spotlight. Magazines and blogs began covering his story. Headlines called him Nigeria's fastest-growing entrepreneur, highlighting how a man who was once mocked and abandoned had now risen to national attention. Interviews, features, and social media posts flooded the internet, sharing the tale of a man who refused to let failure define him. Connell's name trended across platforms, and stories of his early struggles, the long nights, the borrowed bike, the sleepless days, inspired countless young Nigerians. People admired his humility as much as his success. Even outside the business world, Connell's story captured hearts. Families, friends, and strangers shared his journey, praising his perseverance and vision. Videos of him explaining how he turned pain into power went viral, and he began receiving messages from aspiring entrepreneurs seeking advice. The boy who was once humiliated, doubted, and left behind was now a symbol of hope and determination. Through it all, Connell stayed grounded. Despite fame and recognition, he never forgot his beginnings or the fire that started it all. Each expansion, each headline, and each viral post reminded him that persistence beats criticism, and that the very words meant to break him had been the fuel that made him unstoppable. His rise wasn't just a business success, it was a story of triumph over heartbreak, a beacon for anyone told they would never succeed. Kunnal was used to crowds by now, but nothing prepared him for the day Chioma walked into one of his public events. The venue was buzzing with clients, media, and young entrepreneurs eager to hear his story. Kunnal was at the podium, confidently talking about Swifthall's growth, when he spotted her at the back, trying to blend in. She smiled nervously, clapping at the right moments, pretending to support the man she had once abandoned. The sight of her sent a quiet shiver through the room, but Kunnal's expression remained calm, unshaken. After the speeches, as guests mingled, Chioma approached him. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. "Kunnal, I just wanted to say congratulations," she murmured, forcing a smile. Kunnal looked at her, seeing something she couldn't hide: regret, surprise, and maybe even a little shame. He nodded politely, shaking her hand, but said nothing more. He didn't need to. His success, his presence, and the admiration around him spoke louder than any words could. A journalist who had been covering the event asked Kunnal to comment on how he managed to rise above betrayal. Without hesitation, he looked directly into the camera, his calm smile steady, and said, "Sometimes losing someone is how you find yourself." The words were simple, yet heavy with truth. The room fell silent for a moment before applause erupted. The statement resonated far beyond the event hall. By the next morning, clips of Kunnal's interview were trending online. Millions of people watched the humble, composed man who had turned heartbreak into motivation. Comments poured in from strangers inspired by his resilience, from those who had faced their own betrayals, and from young Nigerians dreaming of building something meaningful despite challenges. Kunnal's words became more than an answer. They became a lesson, a mantra repeated in homes, offices, and social media feeds across the country. As for Chioma, she watched the viral clips with a sinking feeling. The man she had mocked, humiliated, and left behind now carried himself with a grace and confidence she had never imagined. She realized that support isn't about presence when it's convenient, it's about being there in belief and action. Kunnal had found his true strength in her absence, and the irony was undeniable. The very person who doubted him was now witnessing the man he had become, unshaken, respected, and admired by thousands. Chioma couldn't escape Kunnal anymore. Everywhere she turned, his face was there. On morning TV interviews, magazine covers, and trending social media clips. She would wake up to breakfast in silence, only to find a story about him on her phone. His journey from an abandoned husband to a celebrated entrepreneur filling the screen. The once small man she mocked had become a symbol of inspiration across Nigeria, and every post, every clip, reminded her of what she had lost. Scrolling through Instagram, she saw videos of Kunnal speaking confidently about his company, Swifthall Nigeria, about the struggles he endured and how he never gave up. Viewers praised his humility, his honesty, and the fire that had driven him to succeed. Her friends shared screenshots and tagged her, laughing and congratulating him. Comments like, "This is the man you used to call a failure? And he proves that dedication beats everything," stung her deeply. Each clip was a mirror showing how far he had gone without her. Chioma's pride faltered as she watched people online celebrate the very man she once dismissed. She had been the one who told him he'd never make it, who left him alone with nothing, and now the world was applauding him. She scrolled through interviews where Kunnal spoke of integrity, perseverance, and belief in oneself, all without bitterness, all without pointing fingers. His calm smile and inspiring words made millions cheer, and she sat frozen, realizing the poetic irony of the situation. Her mind kept replaying their past, the arguments, the mocking, the words she thought would break him. Yet here he was thriving and admired. The same man she called a failure was now living the dream she could never be part of. For a moment, Chioma whispered to herself, almost like a confession, "That could have been me beside him." The thought lingered like a quiet ache in her chest. She put down her phone, her hands trembling, her heart heavy with regret. The realization was unavoidable. Kunnal had built everything she had once told him was impossible, and he had done it all alone. The poetic justice was complete. Her absence, her doubt, and her mockery had not stopped him. Instead, they had fueled his rise, and now she had no choice but to witness his triumph from the sidelines. Powerless and silent, while the man she underestimated became the very definition of success, Connell stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of his new Lagos office, the city lights stretching endlessly before him. Below, his staff cheered, clapping and laughing as they celebrated the signing of another major contract. The hum of excitement filled the room. But Connell remained calm, a quiet smile on his face. He remembered the long nights, the borrowed bike, the sleepless hours, and the words that had once cut him to the bone. Every insult, every doubt, every "you'll never make it" had led him to this very moment. A journalist approached, notebook in hand, curiosity in her eyes. "Connell," she asked gently, "what kept you going when no one believed in you?" He turned slowly, gazing at his team with pride before looking back at her. There was a softness in his voice, but the weight of his words carried far beyond the room. "The moment someone says you can't, that's when you must," he replied. The statement hung in the air, simple yet powerful, capturing everything he had endured, everything he had built. The journalist nodded, understanding the depth behind his calm expression. She snapped a few photos, capturing the man who had risen from heartbreak, criticism, and loneliness to stand tall as a symbol of perseverance. Around him, his staff continued their celebration, but Connell's mind drifted briefly to the past, to Chioma's words, the nights he almost gave up, and the small bike that had carried him to his first client. Every struggle felt like a step in a long, purposeful journey. And now, the city, the media, and even strangers online knew the story of a man who refused to be defined by others. He stepped back from the window and looked directly at the camera filming the scene. His eyes reflected both humility and strength. On the screen, the quote appeared in bold letters. "You don't need their belief to succeed, just your own." Behind him, the skyline of Lagos seemed to shine brighter, a symbol of opportunity and dreams realized. As the camera panned over his staff, smiling and celebrating their hard work, Connell felt a profound sense of peace. This was more than a business success. It was a legacy built on resilience, faith in oneself, and unwavering determination. He had proven that setbacks don't define you, betrayal can't stop you, and self-belief can move mountains. For anyone watching, his journey stood as a reminder. Success comes not from others' approval, but from the courage to believe in yourself when no one else does.